So we got a bit of an experiential sense of what that world was like. But as I said, what we're really here today to talk about and to discover is how subversive women were brought down to subservience. Manjari just spoke about Zarina Begum, the 91-year-old courtesan who died yesterday, and that a woman like her could be reduced to merely 50 years after, she had a stage and she had an audience, that she is asking to be allowed to wear a red sari and to sit on stage and sing again. And here were women who, one of the stories that Manjari will speak about is a woman called Bahadur Shah Zafar, who used to throw parties worth 20,000 rupees to get her cats married, And from that to be brought down to, as I said, this level of domestication and subservience, that is a fascinating story. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again Manjari Chaturvedi. Thank you, Manjari. That was riveting. And the screens didn't do, as much justice as watching you close, because we could catch your expressions up front. I don't know how many people caught that at the back. Before we get into all the reasons why this happened, as I just said, that I wanted our audience to get an even greater sense of these women. So let's start with Bahadur Jan. Who was she? How did she enter, how did she become a courtesan? And can you give us a sense of just how much power she wielded and how much chutzpah she had,
If I may say that in last so many years of doing research, Bahadur Jan and Begum Akhtar are probably the most well-known of the tawaifs, whose stories have been written, books have been written, probably films will be made out of those books. And like you said, Bahadur Jan was very, she lived a rich life in Calcutta. She was very well known. She sang beautifully. The gramophone company has written in its records that she was the best-selling artist. So with all that around her, there's one small story that I will share with you and which will tell you that they had their own sense of confidence, whether whoever was in front of them. There's a very famous story of her that, she used to travel in a buggy, in a horse carriage in Calcutta. And once there was
drawn by 6 horses.
Drawn by 6 horses, correct. And so there was one British gentleman who was new in Calcutta, and he saw the carriage going. He thought it was some begum. So he doffed his hat to her. She graciously accepted his greetings and moved on. Later on, that gentleman came to know that she was just a tawaif. So he said that, Bahadur Jan cannot ride a buggy on the streets of Calcutta. I don't remember exact amount. Pranji would say about 300 rupees or 1,000 rupees was the fine in those times for riding a buggy. Now, what does this woman do? She doesn't sit at home. She, as and when she wanted, she drove in the buggy, went to his office, gave him that money, and came back. She earned well. She didn't want to be told what has to be done. So these are the women that we are talking about. And like I said, Bahadur Jan at least has been written about. And I know most of the people here would be fans of Begum Akhtar, Akhtari-Bai Faizabadi, as she was known earlier. But there are hundreds of other such wonderful, talented women who have been just callously removed from the performing art history just by labeling them as Nautch girls, Nachne wali, Gane wali, tawaif. There are hundreds of words which are interchangeably used for these artists.
So, Manjari, now that we've given a flavor of Bahadur Jan, because I found her fascinating, I found that detail fascinating that she threw a marriage ceremony for her cats. It really shows the kind of, the way they owned their life and their establishment and their sense of power. But so how did this project really begin for you? You know, we heard about Zarina Begum, but how did you encounter her? What triggered this entire project for you? And, you know, coming from the background you do, just going by your surname, you know, that you're a Chaturvedi, you're a Brahmin, was there any resistance for you to get into this project from people close to you, your family? So what was the trigger and was there resistance to you?
There was never any resistance to me, I would say that. Because for last almost 20 years I've been performing, and I largely performed to bhakti, which was associated with Sufism. So my work was largely known for that. I trained under a very interesting Abhinaya guru in Chennai, Kalanidhi Narayan. And during her sessions, one of those Abhinaya sessions, she very nicely told me, she said, Manjari, bhakti is okay, but you have to play a character. The day you are able to change your character from one to the other with effortless ease. So if you dance Radha, who is in love, with as much ease as Meera, who is dancing for bhakti, you would be somewhere close to being a dancer. And I thought that, you know, why is she saying this to me? I'm already an established dancer, I'm already performing everywhere. But now when I look back, I think I was 10 years too late in doing this research. In last 10 years, a lot of these tawaifs, these courtesans, have passed away. So a lot of information, which was oral information, is not available now. So my parents, my father was a space scientist, and he never stopped me. In fact, I would say my initial audience in Delhi, when nobody wanted to come and see my shows, I was a new girl from Lucknow who's coming and launching herself in Delhi and performing. My initial audience were all space scientists. So I had Professor U.R. Rao, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, Professor Dhawan, Professor Yashpal sitting in my audience just because I was Chaturvedi's daughter and they were supposed to be there. But they never questioned my, my love for dance, and I continued doing it. Yes, in last couple of years, on my work on the tawaifs, not from my family, but you know, from a lot of sectors I've heard this, that you know, हम बड़ी मुश्किल से कथक को कोठे से बाहर लाए, ये वापस कोठे में ले जा रही है. Now these are statements which are not needed, because why to say that, okay, I'm a classical dancer, I have to look down upon those women who actually kept the art alive 200 years back. So, you know, I want to run down those and then say that, oh, look, I am a classical dancer. So that is a kind of a thing which I faced in last couple of years in this research, and especially in performance, because people said that, oh, you know, this was all dance, which was, you know, amor, eros. It doesn't have bhakti in it. So, you know, if something has bhakti in it, it is acceptable. But if it does not have bhakti in it, it's not acceptable. Also, who says that there's no bhakti for, in, you know, in a romance?
The highest form of bhakti.
That is.
So, you know, I was asking you about what triggered this project for you. Was it encountering Zarina Begum, or was there some other trigger that got you into it?
I encountered Zarina Begum about 20 years back when I started performing. There was a certain concert where we were both slotted together. And I brilliantly came up with the idea of saying that, you know, why should we perform separately? Zarina ji can sing and I will perform to it. And that's the first time I understood the bias that exists in the society. Because Zarina Begum came up to me and she said, बिटिया आप सोचती हैं कि हम आपके साथ गाएं? So I said, but क्यों आप भी perform कर रही हैं, हम भी कर रहे हैं, दोनों साथ कर लेते हैं. And she said, नहीं, आप बड़े घर की हैं. And I said, no, we'll both do it together. We actually did that concert together. And that was the first time I experienced that, you know, there could be a bias even in performing artists, that, you know, what class you belong to. Then subsequently, I was in a journey on my Sufi Kathak and traveled to Central Asia studying the Sufi thought. So I lost touch with her. Last 5, 6, 7 years back, which Nisha mentioned in her story. I met her because she wanted medical support and my foundation was supporting her. So I went to meet her to see how she is. And that's when she said that, Banarsi sari pehenkar ek bar stage par gana hai bitiya. That triggered it off because when I came back to Delhi, I went asking for sponsorships. And most of the time, I had asked sponsorships for my shows. And I had this one very suave gentleman, I would not like to publicly name him here. He very nicely told me, "Arey Manjari ji, आप अपने shows की sponsorship लीजिए. अब ये ज़माना आ गया है कि हम तवाइफों को honor करें." It struck me that I'm sitting across the table, I'm a dancer. Categorically, I'm also a naachne wali. But he's, because I'm articulate, I speak in English, I'm in today's time, he's ready to respect me. But he's not ready to accord a respect to another artist who sang a couple of years back. That triggered it, and I wanted to find out what this whole form is. And the more I went into it, and the more I learned about the biases, for these wonderful women, it just felt that, okay, one has to do it, one has to share it. People need to know the dance form, the music form, and also the women associated with it.
So for yourself, Manjari, what was some of the most, sort of really exciting discoveries which completely overturned whatever idea of the courtesan or the tawaif that, existed? What are the things that you found which completely overturned that?
One very important aspect that, was that Bollywood had created for, I won't say only me, but for everyone. And I'm very happy that today Shri Prant Neval ji is here, who had done a research 25 years back on courtesans and kept a lot of information for us here. Bollywood had told us about this bichari aurat, homebreaker, waiting to get married, a dancer, a singer, the other woman. But when I read about these strong women, and like Pranji also laughingly says that they never wanted salvation in marriage at all. Now, why on earth, even today the women sitting here would agree, that why on earth a woman who is, the Britishers say in their records, are the highest taxpayers in India, why would such women who, and they have a sexual choice, why on earth would they want to get into domesticity and get married and settle down? So this was something completely new that I learned. And it just served a patriarchal purpose of, men saying, oh, usne tawaif se shaadi kar li, usko salvation mil gaya. Arey, they are only putting themselves up by saying that, oh, look, I married a tawaif. In the first place, probably the tawaif didn't even want to get married to you.
But so you're saying that they had massive financial muscle. Where did this idea of them being oppressed prostitutes come? What was the circumstance that made this, the kind of accepted narrative about courtesans?
A lot changed, and that's what I read in the historical records, is around 1857. When, the princely states were annexed, there were, a lot of upheaval was there historically in our country. And these women, and I would like to actually correct here, they were not just women, they were also men. They were all artists, they were all poets, they were all musicians, they were all dancers. They were all patronized by the princely states. We did not have a Vodafone or a Airtel or, the government of India supporting artists. They just had the princely state. So a Rampur Nawab would, or a Bhopal Maharaja would do. So they were supported by these people. Now, as we are, and we tend to immediately cast aspersion to a woman, was that the moment a woman was associated with a princely state, there was immediately an inference that, she must have been sexually exploited. And I wonder, why we did not cast that same aspersion on the men dancing in the courts of the Nawabs? Because we did not think, do we not think of alternate sexuality? Did we not find records of it? But we simply overlooked that fact and only brought these women in. Now, interestingly, it's always nicer to say, wo bichari, who was, kind of living a very independent life, which was not needed, which we could not accept, that how could that be possible? So gradually, with the Britishers also not understanding the hierarchy of the Indian art system, where, the tawaifs were the highest. Then there were the bhands, bhand hote the, nat hote the. तो बहुत से hierarchy थी for entertainers. Similarly, like we have today, we have the A-grade films, we have the B and C grade films. We cannot remove them, they are there. So there were those, but Britishers actually clubbed them all in one and made them Nautch girls. And that, interestingly, was done for taxation purpose and no other purpose. They wanted to club all the tax together and, get the taxation out of them.
So it's interesting, and I think we should emphasize the point that they were amongst the, you're saying, top taxpayers, and some of the courtesans who paid 300 rupees for a show, that would be the higher amount, or did you find people who were paid even more than that?
3,000.
3,000.
Pranji comes up
at that
3,000 at that time was a huge amount.
So, again, we'll come back to the politics of what happened to these women and the difference between the way the men artisans and artists and women were treated. But before that, there's another fascinating story about Mirza Ghalib, and the character called Nawab Jan, who's probably a fictitious name because we don't know who she is. Why don't you share with the audience, of Ghalib's relationship with Nawab Jan? And also why she's a metaphor for this whole courtesan community.
I started doing these concerts on the tawaifs some, I think, 7 years back. And interestingly, I had Nisha very nicely to come up and tell stories, because I felt that only watching a beautiful dance or hearing nice music and going away was not sufficient. We needed to know about these women. We needed to know their stories. So we started doing these interactive concerts, which people, thankfully, like you all, loved, and we kept doing them. Then I started concentrating on individual stories. Somehow, everybody knows about Mirza Ghalib. Ghalib is a beautiful poet, कोई भी इश्क में होता है तो गालिब की शायरी आजकल तो WhatsApp करता है ना? So Ghalib was very well known. But when I went through the letters of Ghalib, trying to find out that, I was just reading it because I wanted information on the tawaifs of those times. Because it's interesting to note that, see, which poet is famous today? It's Javed Sahab or Gulzar Sahab. बाकी हिंदुस्तान में हजारों शायर और होंगे, पर हम उन्हें नहीं जानते, क्योंकि बॉलीवुड उन्हें गाता है. So we know. The similar was for poets, when we are talking about, I'm largely talking about 18th to 20th century. The same was for poets, for the relationship between poets and the tawaifs. जिन शायरों को तवाइफ गाती थी वो फेमस हो जाते थे, बाकी सब को कोई जानता भी नहीं था. So all poets actually aspired to be sung or danced by the tawaifs. भाई उस समय और तो कुछ नहीं था. There were no multimedia, there were no films, there was nothing. People actually sang and danced. So the tawaifs formed a very important link for the poets to become famous. Now Mirza Ghalib has in his letters interestingly mentioned a domni, which means a dancer and a singer. And also at that time, it was, people were not like me that, I only dance, I need a playback for music. There were dancers and singers both. So they would sing and they would dance also. Now, Mirza Ghalib in his letters have mentioned that he, you know, कि एक डोमनी को भी हमने इश्क में मार रखा है. So now it meant that there was an affair. Now, after that, in one of the letters, he's actually written a poetry for that dancer, singer. And he's written it for that woman. Now, because Mirza Ghalib, probably because he didn't want to share the name, he did not write the name. Now, when I researched, I was trying to find out the name. I couldn't find the name because there were certain names of Delhi tawaifs of that era. They could have been anyone. But interestingly, some people in their books have written her name was Chaudhury, her name was Nawab Jan. So we created a character of Nawab Jan. And I completely did a show which was dedicated to Nawab Jan. Some people actually questioned me because my show was titled The Legend of Nawab Jan and the Poetry of Mirza Ghalib. So Ghalib was somewhere below and Nawab Jan was somewhere on a higher pedestal. But my point was that Ghalib wouldn't have been known if she wasn't singing him. She was singing in the court of Bahadur Shah Zafar. So she brought that man into limelight. Now somewhere, even in today's time, anyone who's a muse, who's you know, an inspiration to people, we acknowledge the creative work, but we refuse to acknowledge, and especially if it's a woman, then it's gone. Because we refuse to acknowledge her. We say, oh, you know, they must have been going around. But you have to acknowledge that, you know, if somebody is a muse or for a creative work, that is as important as the creative work itself. And that's what I wanted to say from that concert, that, okay, you know Mirza Ghalib, but you should also know the dancer that he wrote some poetry for. Even if he wrote 4 poetry for her, but she was important in that life.
So, you know, the other interesting thing that comes out in your project, Manjari, is the whole aspect of sexuality. You know, that again, in a time when women, like, you know, I've been saying again and again, were really looked at as property. Women were married off very early at the age of 13 and 14, had no financial independence, were mostly not, you know, following any profession. Here were these women who had their own establishment, their own money, their own muscle, their own power, but they also had their sexuality, you know, and you have a very interesting take on the power that they wielded through that sexuality, that even if the Nawabs came to them, even if they were entertaining them sexually, what was it about them that enslaved and enchanted powerful men, you know? So would you like to talk about that, that what was the sexuality that these women exuded and why was it different from, say, mere prostitution?
In my various interviews with some Nawabs that I spoke to, very interesting things came about. For example, they said that, you know, oh, my grandfather could afford a harem of 500 women, but he would only go to that one tawaif. So now, the interesting part was that, you know, when a man, and we are talking about a society that we cannot see with the lens of today's times. We have to see with the lens of when it existed. So when a Nawab could afford a harem of 500 women, then it put a question to me that, you know, why that one tawaif was so important that he would not leave that tawaif. And that made me probe deeper that, you know, why it was. And I realized that it wasn't just about a sexual intercourse. It was what all she brought with her. We are talking about a time when there were almost no negligible interaction between a man and a woman. They could not even sit and talk to each other. So there were these tawaifs who were well read, where if a person actually went and spoke to her, she would come and said, अगर एक शेर पढ़ा तो वो दूसरा शेर पढ़ती थी. अगर उन्होंने कोई political बात करी उस वक्त की, उस दौर की, तो वो political बात बताती थी. कुछ secrets भी बताती थी किसी दूसरे नवाब की या किसी उसकी. So there was always this gossip element which, you know, a lot of men will not accept here, but they love it. So it was, they actually went to the kota to, you know, listen gossip. Because she would tell about the other people. So somewhere, it was just not what we today say about sexuality, that was just that. It wasn't. In fact, one Nawab Saab in Hyderabad actually told me that his grandfather used to go to a Balakhana and to one tawaif. And he said, वो कुछ नहीं करते थे, वो तो जाके बात करके आ जाते थे. उन्हें बस बात करने की तलब होती थी कि किसी से बात करें. So he would just actually go there, talk and come back. So those are different times where people lived, where, men and women were not allowed to sit and talk to each other. And somehow, that's why we put everything into the purview of a sexual intercourse between that man and a woman. Another thing, that they were the film stars of their time. It's like, a Madhuri Dixit of today's time. I think we are 1.3 billion, so half of us would be in love with her. Does that mean that the half of the population of India has slept with her? No. She's something that they aspire
object of desire.
Yeah. And the same was with these tawaifs. They were objects of desire because they were on their own. Yes, there was, we live in a patriarchal society, and I won't say that there was no sexual exploitation. Of course there was. But vis-a-vis, the wives being sexually exploited and the tawaifs being sexually exploited, I think they were in a better position because they were earning.
So I think the key point is that they were very accomplished women, very, and they were muses, they were practitioners, they were accomplished and they were financially secure, so that sense of them being powerful people with choices is a complete overturning of the trope that you otherwise have of a courtesan. I'm going to come back to the exploitation aspect of it, Manjari, in a bit, because, even Nisha spoke about how I think it was Jagdan Bai's who did not want her daughter to grow up in that tradition, or, so there was clearly even within them a sense of not wanting their children to grow up in this, so that's something we must talk about. But before that, these dancers were dancing only for a male audience. Now when you're reviving that, you're dancing for a very different audience. Do you think that you're intuiting correctly what if that art form doesn't survive? How have you been able to reconstruct it? And is the audience important? Is the male gaze important? What do you think is different for dancing to a mixed audience now?
That's a question, or that's an aspect that was a lot on my mind, that because, the tawaifs actually performed for men. So it was a dance which was predominantly, as we say, for the male gaze. But the interesting aspect that I found in our own dance texts was that when we see the Nayak and Nayika Bhed, jo were written by Bharat in, some century, which was, the whole dance treaty was written. And even in that, when you see that there are largely 8 types of women characters, but only 4 types of men characters. And if we, kind of go into the intricacies, there are some 344 types of women characters, but only 174 of men. So somehow women were more interesting than men. They had many more layers. So even the poets, even Bharat Muni thought that, these many layers need to be explored through dance and music. We can't just have, 4 distinctions that are applicable for men to be applicable for women too. So keeping those in mind, I realized that, dance actually per se, when we're talking about a male gaze, is very different. And that is one complaint that I feel when I'm researching, is that everything that was written about those women was written by men. So today I was dancing here. If we go back to 200 years, the men sitting in the audience have written about that dance. So history knows how those men have, seen, oh, how beautiful, oh, she looks great, or, kya nazakati, kya adati. That is recorded for all these women. But what that woman felt when she was dancing, We do not have any records of that. Today, I can say that, oh, there must have been 500 men watching the dance, but I was dancing for the one that I love. It is very interesting character that, if I may say, is very interesting characterization of women in Indian art forms. Because the same thing which we say in Bollywood, or we might say that, goes against the femininity of a woman, is that, the bosom heaving, the swaying of hips, it's all part of our dance training. And it's okay for the character who you are dancing for, not for the audience. So there is a difference. Now when we come back to a male gaze, the first fact is that the dancer who's dancing at that point of time is dancing for whatever is in her mind. She's not dancing for that male gaze who's sitting there and watching her. So we need to first translate that and understand that. So if there is a characterization of Radha and Krishna, Radha is dancing for Krishna. She might create all those nuances, whatever you want to call it, for Krishna. The others are incidental who are watching her.
And plus you, when we were chatting earlier, you had a very pithy line, which was to say that you can do down seduction, but seduction is very difficult business, So it's very easy to just say, oh, they were just dancing to seduce, but to be great seducers is itself a great art form, We're going to run out of time, so 2 quick questions. One, I don't think we've shared enough stories, So apart from Zarina Begum and Gauhar Jan, are there any others who capture just the sheer effervescence and power and kind of idiosyncrasies of these women? And then we'll come to the exploitation question.
A very interesting story that I want to share with you is of a tawaif from Tanjavur. Her name is Mudupulani. And she actually wrote erotic poetry. Now, her poetry was banned by Britishers. They brought in a lot of Victorian morality for all of us. And if I may say, the initial post-independence Angrez Indians very gladly accepted all of that and said, oh, we are very bad, we are immoral people. So all that came into being, and Mudupulani's book was actually banned by the Britishers. And subsequently, some dancers in Tanjavur actually rallied with the king for publishing it, and thankfully it was published. And later on, a translation of it was published so that I could actually read it. Interesting is that most of us actually don't even know her. That's a name that won't strike any chord with us. And the same goes for another very interesting woman that I would share with you, is Kesarbai Kerkar. She was from Goa. And you know where her voice is? It's on the NASA website. It's listed that Voyager 1, when it was sent into space in 1977, it was sent with a disk which had the sounds of the world. So she finds a place there. Her composition, Jaat Kahan Ho Akeli Gori, is actually in the outer space with the Bach and Beethovens of the world, but we don't know Kesarbai Kerkar. And if you can go and Google and find her name on NASA's website, and I found it so interesting that this woman, and that satellite is actually now in the outer space of our universe also. But that voice is still there. There's another very interesting story of a woman called Tilo, and she was from Rajasthan. And she wanted, most of the tawaifs, they earned a lot of money and they did a lot of social work. So she made a pole, which is a gate. And the Maharaja there refused that, she can't build a gate because I will have to go under it. So if she builds, we'll have it broken down. So she said, fine. So the Maharaja was traveling to some godforsaken, shikar for some time. And what she does is she gets a gate made and puts a Krishna statue on the top. Now the king every day went through it and couldn't break it because he couldn't break that Krishna statue.
And in fact, you had another lovely story about this tawaif who put out advertisement she put out posters which said that, you know, I have this show and if you don't come, you'll really be missing a lot because, what is the exact phrase that she used?
Miss Dulari. Mukhi, if we could have that poster on the screen, it's called Miss Dulari. There was this very enterprising...
Uncle, will you just put that on?
While it comes on, I'll explain it to you that, you know, I found it very interesting. Pranji actually gave me that poster, and this woman was advertising her own self, and I found that incredible that at a time when they were looked down upon and everything, she was holding a concert in Lahore, and she was inviting people. So very nicely, she'd written below that, you know, the one who stays away doesn't taste the honey of life. Come here to listen to my music. I find it incredible that, you know, oh, it's here. So lucky he who hastens to taste the honey of life, unlucky he who stays at home with wife. So these women knew what they wanted. They knew that they had a largely male audience, and they knew how to relate to that male audience. And like I said to you in a talk, it's very easy to say that, oh, you know, they seduced men. I think most women sitting here would say that it's a tough job.
You know, the bell is ringing. You had some photographs of tawaifs and...
can we have that sartorial sense? I'll just quickly run through those and share with you. Because all this whole business of cleavage showing, body hugging, outfits of tawaif, trust me, in all my research, I have never found any costume which resembled to the Bollywood version of what we all are living as tawaifs. Even when they danced, they were fully covered from head to toe. This is a dance performance in Delhi. These images are from Pran Nevilleji's collection. So if you see that the tawaifs are covered from head to toe, there is no representation of any... This would put any current fashion designers to shame.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah. They were fashionistas of their time. They had clothes and jewels designed for them. So nowhere did, even if you say, and these women, if you see, they also, you know, this whole business of our thinking that all tawaifs were Meena Kumari lookalikes and Rekha lookalikes actually doesn't hold good. They were artists, they were singers. And this is Nawab Jan from Lahore. So I wanted to share this with you that, you know, this whole perception of a Bollywoodized version of tawaifs that we are living and not letting go is all bizarre. I actually want the coming generations to have an alternative narrative, to find an understanding into the women as artists and not as what the hearsay of the society has been. And like I said in a one line, if I may say, that today a Birju Maharaj and his family, or Amjad Ali Khan Sahab and his family, they all say with such a sense of pride that, you know, our forefathers were the dancers in Wajid Ali Shah's court. Our forefathers were the musicians in Gwalior Maharaja's court. There's a sense of pride. But do we have a Sanjay Dutt saying, I belong to the Gharana of Jatin Bai? We don't. Because there's a sense of shame. So somewhere, for that same work, we put the gender first and allowed to live a section of women and their families with shame, whereas the men were celebrated as ustads of their time. I, as a student of Kathak, do not remember reading any life history like we have in the exams called Jeevani. मैंने नहीं पढ़ी कि कोई जीवनी मलका जान की मुझे पढ़ाई गई हो या मुझे गौहर जान पढ़ाई गई हो. मुझे हाँ बिरजू महाराज के सारे जितने फादर फोर फादर सबकी जीवनियाँ आदमियों की मैंने पढ़ी. So somewhere was it the domain of only men? No. the women were performing. One small one I'll also share with you. We all say Badi Ghulam Ali Khan Saab, you know, you would see everybody touching their ear and saying, oh, wonderful artist. He used to accompany a tawaif called Inayat Bai Derovali. We don't even know her name. Now, if Badi Ghulam Ali Khan Saab was accompanying Inayat Khan Derovali, either she was equally of a equal caliber, or she must have been of a higher caliber. I'm a dancer. Zakir Hussain is not my accompanist. He's of a different caliber, I'm different. So Inayat Bai must have been, by the same inference, would have been either same or probably more in caliber than him. But we don't know her. We have barely know her as part of a documentation history. She doesn't exist. Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab exists. So somewhere we have not looked at art with the idea of art. We have looked at it first with the gender, whether the performer was a man or a woman, and then we see what art it was.
Thank you. Let's open this up to a few questions. Yeah, there's one there.
Did you get a chance to look at Allah Jalai Bai, who had this reputation that she only sang for the Rana, and her rendition of Kesariya Balam was perhaps one of the best that we've ever heard, and her story?
Yes, she's also part of that. And interestingly, you know, why she's part of this is because a lot of the time people actually told me that this was largely, you know, Muslim Nawabs, you know, patronizing these women and them being converted into Islam. There's a whole lot of this aspect that was told to me. Allah Jalai Bai is interesting because she largely sang for Hindu courts. So there was a whole lot of tawaifs who actually sang in Rajasthan, sang and danced for the Hindu rulers. And I have to go to Bikaner and take their the archives, because there's even written that how much money they were paid for each mujra. So that is interesting because, you know, it's an interesting take, and that's why Allah Jalai Bai was important, because she was a Muslim singer who was singing largely in a Hindu Maharaja's court, and interestingly, singing bhajans. Yeah. So, I happened to meet Allah Jalai Bai. You're very lucky. Yes, I did meet her. Yeah. And I was just asking her that what is so peculiar about her singing, that she was enamored by the Maharaja of Bikaner. And she told me a very, very interesting story. She said that, you see, the kind of singing I do, particularly this Mand, it is Kesariya Balam, it has not been sung by anybody. Then I asked her that how about Lata Mangeshkar? Do you think that she cannot sing? And you believe me, I mean, she used some 4-letter words, which I cannot relate here. She said she has to take birth 5 times before she is able to sing Kesariya Balam like I do. I'm so glad you shared this here. This is the kind of confidence that these women had with their art. And look where we've relegated them to, interchangeably using prostitution and dance and music together. She sang beautifully, and she knew what her art was. And if I may say also, that supposing if Lata Mangeshkar was born 200 years back, there were no pen drives and CDs and recording studios. There were no NCPA or IIC or India International Center, Habitat Center, anything. She would have either been at a kota or a Raja's court. There were only 2 performing spaces. So, you know, we cannot sit on a judgment with today's time and say, oh, why did they do that? There was only that place. I have a dance studio in Delhi. Supposing someday some media people come and they ask me, oh, you know, acha thoda sa karke dikha dijiye, wo kaise perform karti hongi. Now, supposing if I show them in my dance studio, which we use a fancy terminology of saying it to a dance studio, does that place become a quota because I performed there for 4 people? You know, we need to question these things, that why we relegated these women to a very different time frame and, you know, just put them in a box and did not allow them to move out of that.
Once I was having a discussion with Shyam Benegal. He told me a very interesting story about Moghubai Kegrikar. He told that for his movie Bhumika, he wanted to take her you see, for this heroine's mothers, you know, because she learned music from her. And he wanted to use her voice. And he said that I approached her and I told her that, Baiji, why don't you sing for my movie? He says, movie? What are you talking about it? I never sang for any movie and I will not sing for it. He said, you name your price. He says, absolutely not doing, I will not do it. This is the story about
Yes,
her.
there's a question there.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for absolutely elegantly bringing out the gender bias which existed. And I personally am horrified at you know, the way we used to look, including myself, right? Just one question, just fast forwarding. If you look at today's Bollywood, we have similar gender biases for item girls, right? Whereas the Ranveer Singh dancing and gyrating all sorts of body parts is perfectly all right? Will history look back and have a similar commentary like you had on today's Bollywood?
That is, if I may say, because we continue to live in a patriarchal society. So till we keep doing that, we will never find women performers at par with male performers. So you and I have to make that change. So then history will judge us differently. And why we are creating this whole alternative narrative and documenting it is that history should have another narrative to look at. The fear today is that there's only Umrao Jan and Pakiza for people to see, or much worse versions of, you know, dance. I saw a BBC film where there was a tawaif mujra sequence, and this is for BBC, so it was an educational film. And there was, you know, the men were actually holding money in their mouth and were asking the woman as a dancer to come and take that. Now, it was a highly Bollywoodized version of that. Now, if I see my research, the women, the tawaifs, were actually given money in a tray covered with cloth and were not even said that this is your payment. What was said was, ye aapke pandan ka kharcha hai. So that was the class which was there. But what have we brought it to, you know, throwing that money, which was never part of their culture? There are no documentations of it. So I hope history does not judge us similarly.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, this is from the book.
Sorry, I can't see. Is there a question happening?
Yeah, me.
Here.
Ma'am, this is from the book, The
I
Last
don't think
Mughals.
I have to ask any question at all. I only like to make observation that I admire, I congratulate Manjari ji for taking up this project, Courtesan project. I'm so happy about it. And she is the only artist in the subcontinent, I can say, because I've given lectures in Lahore also on art and culture. She's the only artist who has the courage, dedication for doing something which nobody has done so far in India. I'm so proud of her. And I'm the only writer who wrote this book after 7 years research. People laughed at me when I wrote this book, Nautch Girls of India. It's a big magnum opus after 7 years research, but people just laughed. This man is mad. He's a diplomat writing about the Nautch girls and tawaifs. He's a madman. That is what 25 years ago people said. I'm so happy that I'm being congratulated also for doing what I have done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pranjal.
Hello. Ma'am, this question is from, question
sorry,
is from
just hold
The Last Mughals by William Dalrymple. And actually the book states that the tawaifs would have their late night sessions. So the Mughals would sit through whole night up till 3 o'clock in the morning. While the British were very disciplined. They would wake up at 3:30 and start, you know, the day's routine. Do you not blame the tawaifs for the decadence of the Indian society and why the Mughal society lost to the British?
The Britishers actually thought all of our culture and texts and everything is for decadence of the society. So let's not get into that. Because they largely thought that everything that the Indian society thought was decadence. If I may also say that, you see the sculptures in Khajuraho and everywhere. These are very explicit sculptures. But I also have one aspect about that is that they have largely been made by men. So they are sculptures which represent a man's vision of a woman's body. I hope that some sculptures were made by women. They would have shown some much loved, differently made bodies.
I just, to your question about decadence between the British and the Nautch girls, I think it's important to put on record that when the British came to India, India had 23.7% of the world's GDP, and when the British left, we were 2% of the world's GDP. So I think who was more decadent and more deprivatory for us is quite clear, not the Nautch girls. They paid the taxes. Yes, sir.
Is it on? Yeah.
No, sorry, just there's a question here.
I want to bring, this was such a beautiful evening. Thank you so much. And Radhe Radhe to all of you. But because when I speak about scriptures, we've been talking about tawaifs 200 years, 300 years back. But if I bring the exports from Srimad Bhagavatam, the 11th canto, there is a description of 24 gurus. And among the 24 gurus, one is Pingla Vaishya. And that Pingla is described in such an amazing manner that Indian thought process has actually put her into the list of one of the 24 gurus. This has been our culture. What you learn from the best, from all of them, they always had something to share. So Pingla Vaishya is someone, when I narrate stories from my Bhagavatam, I literally bring Pingla in such a way because Dattatreya Swayam, one of the 24 incarnations of Vishnu, had come to see her, who's Pingla. And that's how she's narrated there among the 24 gurus.
How beautiful. I'll also share here that even in Buddhism, if you would read about it probably, and a lot of people don't want to acknowledge it, there's the presence of Dakinis, or Dakinis as they call. Now these were women who were actually part of a sexual process for the Buddhist to attain salvation. And they were the gurus. They were not prostitutes, but they were gurus for them to be able to reach the other realm. So these have been part of our inherent society. And like Goswamiji is here, that we are a society that thrived on love of Radha and Krishna, two people who were never married to each other. And they are an epitome of our love, not Ram or Sita. They could be epitome of virtue, but they're not epitome of love. Love is Radha and Krishna, two people not married to each other. We've lived this for centuries. And beautifully we've lived it through centuries. We've explored love through them. The arts, Indian arts cannot survive without the love of Radha and Krishna.
Well, thank you very, very much, Manjari. It's just wonderful that today that all of us can go away with that sense that the courtesans were really women of education, literature, conversation, politics, and high art. And let's hope we can place them back where they really deserve to be. As we call this session, they were the subversive ustads, and that'll be a great way of remembering them. Thank you so much, Manjari, for undertaking this project and for sharing this evening with us. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.